Hello student and welcome to Smart Coach. Today we are going to discuss another topic of ancient Indian history and the topic is Aryan migration. So let me write it down for you. The topic is Aryan migration. It is perhaps the most controversial topic from ancient Indian history because the studies are still going on, and until recently many evidence had come up which some historians say that Aryans did not belong to India, they came from outside. Some historians said that they did belong to India, they never came from outside. Now let's talk about first of all these two categories, then I'll go to other debates related to Aryan migration. Now when we talk about Aryan migration, it is suggested that somewhere around 1500 BC, a group of nomadic pastoralists entered India and they changed the whole civilization setup that had already been established in India. The civilization, the first civilization, which is the Bronze Age civilization which began in India, was established by Harappans, and they were set of different race with different cultural traits. Now, after the decline of Harappan civilization, a new culture came into Indian subcontinent and these people were called Aryans. Now, first person who talked about Aryan invasion was Sir Mortimer Wheeler. We have talked about him and his theory on the decline of Harappan civilization, and he said that it was the invasion from the Aryans which resulted in the decline of Harappan culture. Now with that began the whole concept that the present race of India, whom we call Aryans, do not belong to India. Mortimer Wheeler talked about the invasion on various grounds, that Aryans were people who used horse, and they came to India and invaded India because they were worshipping God who are associated with war and destruction of fort, like Purandhar, the god called Indra, who is also known as Purandhar, and all these specific features have been I have already discussed about that when we talked about the decline of Harappan civilization. But today I am going to talk about how people think that Aryans came to India. What are the reason why people think that Harappan civilization, after its decline, another race came to India and the people of Harappan civilization did not belong to the Aryan group. Now, what are the reasons? The first reason is definitely the difference in culture altogether. Now, you have to remember why it is said that Aryans did not belong to India, or they did not belong to the group of people who formed Harappan civilization, is because of the difference of culture. Now, what is the difference of culture? The first difference is obviously that Aryans cremated their dead body and Harappans buried their dead body. That is a vast difference. The burial practice and cremation practice simply shows that how different these two people were and their cultural practices were. Along with that, the information about the environment, as far as Aryans are concerned, in the Rig Veda, we hardly find mention of rice or cotton, which means that the early Aryans did not use or did not have ample, I won't say they altogether did not have any information, but they did not have enough information regarding rice and cotton. What did they use? Because they came from a very cold place, it is said that they usually used horse. At the same time, what we see that Harappans did not use horse. Knowledge, I would say, of horse. Whereas Aryans seems to be people who were well who were efficiently using horse in warfare along with chariot. Also in Harappan civilization, in the Harappan site, we have found the clay model of bullock cart. We have not found clay model of chariot, remember that. Horse driven chariot. Okay, we have seen that the bullock cart was driven by bulls, but we have not seen a horse had driven the chariot. There is only one place in Harappan civilization, that is Surkotada, where we find the skeleton of horse, and otherwise in other places it's superficial evidence of horse, which means that we have not found skeleton, but because of some sedimentary deposit, the DNA of skeleton, DNA structure of horse has been found in other site, but no proper skeletal remain of horse has been found in Harappan civilization. Whereas Rigvedic text is full of description of horse, 7 horse driven chariot and everything. So we know that they knew how to use, Aryans knew how to use horse, but then again Harappans did not. These are the basic reason why it is said that Aryans were separate race, they came from outside and established their culture. But later on, many historians have come up with their own theory saying that Aryans were not immigrants. They already lived in India and they established a culture and it kept on growing. Now, what are the evidence that they are giving? Let's find that also. This I have talked about why Aryans cannot be tagged as part of Harappan civilization. Now, let's say what are the historians saying why they think that Aryans were part of Harappan culture. First of all, Rig Veda never mentions about migration. Instead, it calls the place it is living as Sapta Sindhu. It calls Sapta Sindhu or Aryavrat as its homeland. If you see, in the later Vedic age, we do have signs where it is said that the Aryans were moving from western border of India to eastern border. But in the first part of Rig Veda or in the earliest mandalas of Rig Veda, we don't find any sign which says that they traveled from other part of the world to India. They don't talk about such mass migration. Instead, the geographical description that they give, they talk about India itself. They call India as their land and Sapta Sindhu to be the main rivers of their land, which is a very important reason why it is said that most probably Aryans lived in India when Rig Veda was compiled. Now, the problem is Rig Veda was not compiled in 1500 BC. If you see, there are evidence like Burza home inscription which has been derived from Central Asia. The oldest tribe of Central Asia, Hatiti tribe, in that inscription are speaking about Aryans and their gods, which means that Rig Veda or the compilation of Rig Veda had taken place much before 1500 BC. As such, it is suggested that most probably Aryans already lived in India along with Harappans, or they were part of the Harappan civilization. Now, with all these evidence in hand, a recent study has been done. This is known as the genetic study of the DNA. Ancient people. Now, whatever archaeological evidence we have found, the skeletal remain that we have found from Indian subcontinent has been studied, their genes have been studied, their DNA has been studied, and this study also approves of migration. Now, this is the most recent study. The reports came out this year itself, and in this study the Y chromosome of man were studied. The male skeleton's DNA was studied, and it was seen that definitely there was amalgamation of various races in India. The Harappans, whom we say that they were the ancestors, were also people who came from west and settled in India with their own agricultural practices. then came wave of another migration which took place somewhere around 1800 BC to 1500 BC, and in that migration the race whom we call Aryan came to India, and this suggests that before coming India there was lot of inter exchange and biological assimilation of races took place before Aryans came to India. So, even when they came to India, they were not like Europeans. The homeland which is the Europe which is tagged as their homeland, they were no more European. Throughout the journey from Europe to India, they had lot of assimilation. There was a lot of mingling that happened with the local cultures. The culture changed. The race itself took a new shape, and in 1500 to 1800 BC, these people did enter India. Now, that said and that settled the whole thing. Let's move towards the whole idea of Aryan migration. Where did the idea actually develop from? So, when we talk about when did this idea of Aryan migration develop, the year will be 16th century. As early as 16th century, it was said that most probably there is affinity between people of India and the people of Europe. And how did that idea came up? In 16th century, the Europeans started traveling to India, and there was this merchant of Florence. So, somewhere around 1540, this merchant of Florence, who was called Filippo Sassetti, he wrote in his letter that there was lot of similarity between Sanskrit and three other languages, that is Latin and Greek. Renaissance, if you know that in 15th century Renaissance took place in Europe, and there was a renewed interest in Latin and Greek literature, and people were studying those literature, and when these people came to India, they saw that Sanskrit also has an affinity with the Latin and Greek language. Now, after that, many other people came. There were missionaries who came to India, like Thomas Stephens. Such missionaries also talked about the similarity between Sanskrit, Greek and Latin. But later on, it was in 1786 that Sir William Jones actually presented a lecture in the Asiatic Society of Bengal. This association was created for studying, the history of India, the culture of India, and in that lecture, he presented that there is some affinity between Sanskrit, Greek, Latin. Now, let me write it down. It was as late as 1786. So, remember, in 16th century itself, the affinity was recognized by linguists, and in 1786, Sir William Jones, he was also one of the founder of Asiatic Society of India. So, Sir William Jones, it should be Jones, not Jones. So, Sir William Jones, he gave in his lecture, he mentioned that there is lot of similarity between Sanskrit, Latin and Greek. Further, he also included the language like Celtic, Germanic and Persian. He said similarity is also seen in these languages. As such, what happened? This simply showed that most probably the people who were speaking this language in ancient times must have stayed in one community. They were part of one community which somehow spread or expanded or migrated to other part of the world. Though at that time, Sir William Jones never said that all the language has come out of Indo-European language group. He said, he used the word common source. All these language, he said, has a common source. Later on, in 1813, another linguist, Thomas Young, coined the word Indo-European or Indo-Germanic linguistic group or language group. By this word, he was suggesting that the members of one community lived in one particular place, which is the homeland for all the people who spoke these languages. He said that most probably the easternmost border of that community is India and the westernmost border of this community was Germany. Now, this created lot of controversy and people wanted to find which could be the original homeland of Aryans. Now, this was all the linguistic evidence that we found which says that Aryan migrated to India. But there were many archaeological evidences also which were found which suggested that Aryans migrated to India. Now, let's talk about such archaeological evidence. If we look into the archaeological evidence, the first evidence that we find is somewhere near Pontic steppe of Volga river. If you know, Volga river is in Russia, okay. So, in Russia, we find the first evidence of what you will say Proto-Indo-Iranian group. This group is known as Proto-Indo-Iranian. Now, where did they live? They lived in the Pontic steppe of Russia, and there they had a community which shows the trait of Aryans. What were the traits of Aryans? First of all, use of ochre color pottery. The pottery that they used were ochre color pottery. Then at the same time, they had hierarchical social structure with a chief on the top of the hierarchy. So, if you look at Rig Veda, in Rig Veda also we have hierarchical social structure. The eldest patriarch of the family is the head of the family, then that family, group of families or kulas form grama, group of gramas from Vish, and group of Vish forms Jana or tribe. If you see, there is a hierarchy, and such hierarchical social structure was there in Volga river cultures. Few of the important names that came out where few of the important cultures which had similar cultural practice were Kurang culture. From that we have Samana and Yamana culture. If you look into the map, the present location of Kazakhstan and Ukraine is the place where these cultures actually developed. They were pastoralist in economic activity. They were pastoralist and they had horse. They had mutual, custom of giving gifts and taking gifts, and all these cultures, developed in that place. And these cultures that I mentioned, they developed somewhere around 4000 BCE. Now, after this, from Kurang, Samana and Yamana culture or Pontic steppe, they started the migration. The next phase of migration began, and in the second phase of migration, they were known as Indo-Iranians, and this took place somewhere around 2000 BC to 1800 BC. Now, from this phase, these pastoralist nomadics, they came to Iran, and from pastoralism they started adopting the techniques of agriculture as well. In Iran, they found a better living condition because remember, in the Pontic steppe, it was extremely cold, and if we study at the climatic change of that era, we do see that European plate was going through lot of climatic change, and there was tectonic change as well. As such, the people might have migrated to Iran. In Iran, they also created many important cultures, and Shintashta culture is one of them. The next phase of migration began somewhere around 1500 BC to 1100 BC. From Shintashta culture, that is in Central Asia, from Iran, we see another phase of migration, and people moved towards northern Afghanistan, and this formed Bactria, Marjania culture. Now, this culture is associated with 1500 BC to 1100 BC. This migration continued, and here they are known as, what are they known as? In Iran, they were known as Indo-Iranian, and the next group who came to Bactria, Marjania, they were known as Indo-Aryans. Most of the rituals that we talk about, or the cultural trait that we talk about, it developed in the second phase of migration in the Central Asia, and from there they traveled to northern Afghanistan, and Oxus River became the center of their civilization, and from there during 1500 BC they entered India. Now, there are some literary evidence also which is associated with the whole migration theory. There is a book called Avesta or Zendavesta. Now, this is a Zoroastrian book, and if you know, Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest Abrahamic religion that developed in Central Asia, and it is a book associated with Iran and Persia. They also speak about Aryans. They have word like Aryan, and this shows that Aryan were one of the oldest races that entered into Central Asia, and they must have had trade relation with many other tribes of that place. This is literary evidence. Another evidence which speaks about Aryan, and which is as old as 2100 BC, is the Hittite tribes inscription which we find from Turkey. Now, that is known as Burzahom inscription of Hittite tribes. Now, this inscription is very important because Hittites, if you know, they are also mentioned in Old Testament of Bible, and it is said that Hittites are one of the ancient tribes of Central Asia. Now, this inscription, Burzahom inscription, which is a rock inscription, it speaks about the trade relation of Hittites with various tribes of Central Asia, and there is a contract signed in the name of God like Indra and Varuna, which suggests that Rigvedic culture or religion was already prevalent somewhere around 2100 BC. So, we can write the time frame 2100 BC. Now, this inscription is from 14th century BC. Okay. So, this suggests that the Aryans had already come into Central Asia during that time. And then again, when we study Rigvedic age and Rigvedic literature, we know the ancient mandalas of Rigveda were compiled somewhere around 1500 BC, where they only speak about the Indian subcontinent, and it is very clear by 1500 BC they had well established themselves in Indian subcontinent, because along with that they also speaks about Rigveda also speaks about such towns which are known as ghost towns or fort cities, which might have been the cities established by Harappans but later on deserted for some reason. So, with that we understand that yes, there was an Aryan migration. There is enough evidence to suggest there was an Aryan migration. In our next chapter, we will talk about more. We will talk more about the Vedic literature and the culture of the Aryans, but for now, this is all about Aryan migration. Thank you.